Welcome back, everyone. I was cut off. There's an interruption there, so I had to go, but I'm back. Sorry for the interruption. But as I was saying before the end of part one here, So Descartes doesn't want to be a solipsist. It's a very lonely existence, literally, right? Because everything outside the world uh, is seems real, but may not be real. So the people you meet, not just a mug or that you drink from, or a squirrel that you see, or a tree, but the people in your life you don't know. You cannot convince yourself for sure that they're real. That's not a way to live, right? That's how most of us prefer to live with some sort of faith or some sort of certainty that these people are real, that the external world is real. So if Descartes has a problem, I think therefore I am, I know I'm secure, but that's not enough for him. He wants to build up the certainty of the external world. So if I'm a thinking being, then the thoughts that I can reason, deduce, right? Not look out yet, security and all this stuff, because that, the senses fool you. We know this, that was the first meditation. But deduction, the ideas that I could deduce, necessary cause and effect of reasoning, these type of chains of reasoning, I can be sure of, because I already know I'm a thinking being, and thinking is logical to a great extent, right? So, mathematics, these things are in logic, these things are sure. But the great big thing that he wants to prove is God. Because if you could prove God exists, then everything else falls in line, the external world. So then how does one rationally, deductively, without empiricism, because you can't empirically prove the existence of God, right? But how can you deduce the existence of God? Russell doesn't get into it. He says, other people do it better, which is true, right? But Descartes really is copying, cheating, copying, borrowing, agreeing with, whatever you want to, there's very few original ideas, so I'm not blaming him. But prior to this, in the year 1000, around there, was a fellow named Saint Anselm, a great medieval Christian Catholic thinker. And he has a famous proof of the existence of God called the ontological proof of God. Not empirical, but strictly rational. It goes like this. His formula is, that which none greater can be conceived. By definition, God. What kind of proof is this? But he's saying, can you think of someone strong? Yeah, my daddy's strong, little kid might say. But surely you could think of someone stronger than that, right? Like the possibility of. Sure. But then if you could think of that, you could think of someone greater than that. Well, of course. It seems to go infinitely, right? But Anselm says, that which none greater can be conceived. That which none greater can be conceived. Well, you might ask yourself legitimately, there are critics who would say precisely this. Why can't you just keep going infinitely? But this is somewhat peculiar to Western philosophers. I say this because non-Western philosophers, Buddhist thinkers come to mind as well. They don't have this notion that that there must be an end. Why can't things go infinitely? And by end, I don't mean just the end in the future, but the end going backwards too. They don't have this notion of like a creation point. In the West, we have an alpha and omega, right? But outside the West, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, if it's eternal, if the universe is eternal, then why must there be a creation point? But to the Western mind, it seems more logical to many of us that there must have been a creator. But then who created the creator was an obvious problem that the East is trying to remind us of. But anyway, for long story short, Descartes agrees with this ontological proof of Saint Anselm and others after him, that there must be the highest possible idea of a strongest possible, most powerful, most perfect being possible, that which none greater can be conceived. And by definition, then, that perfect being beyond which nothing greater can be conceived is God. So there you go. You have rationally proved God. And when you do so, after you do so, then you could reasonably assume, and you have to assume actually by definition, that this God is perfectly good, perfectly benevolent. Why? Because if this God that you conceived is less than perfectly benevolent, playing tricks on you, then guess what this God is? It's not God. Because it's less than a more perfect being, perfectly benevolent, that you could have conceived. I hope you all follow this. If you don't, please ask me, email or comments or whatever, but I think it should be okay, right? So therefore, this perfectly good God cannot play tricks on us. Again, because if this God is playing tricks on us, this God is not God by definition. Why? Because that which none greater can be conceived is God, rationally. So, since we have this idea of a perfect God, and one of the qualities of perfection is perfect goodness, then the world that God has created must be true, meaning God doesn't play tricks on us. So then we could have faith that this mug here, the tree over there, the squirrel climbing up that tree, every other person that I see is real and trustworthy. I don't have to be skeptical about it all the time. Why? Because we've established God. After we establish the security of the self as a thinking being, right? So I hope that makes sense. That's how he becomes this the great foundationalist thinker. After he tears down everything, then he builds up a secure foundation of knowledge. You could say that's a horrible proof. Many people would agree with you. Most people, almost all people now would think, that they don't take the ontological proof seriously. But we must respect it in a way, because it has been, if not the predominant rational proof, one of the predominant ways of proving or arguing for the existence of God, the reality of God, for centuries, right? And even if you're not interested in the theology of it, now you realize how it affected philosophy, modern philosophy. So this is Cartesian foundationalism. Now, one of the things that Descartes is famous for as well, this is after he does all of this, right? After he secures the foundation of knowledge. He's famous for his model of the human being, human nature. It's a hybrid nature. There's at once the spirit mind, or the soul more generically, and the body, what we call Cartesian dualism. The West is fond of dualisms, right? Mind, body. We got this from Plato as well. And Descartes in modern times is pretty much doing what Plato has always done, the mind and body. So, problem though, he's not careful about this. And I don't really know how more careful he could have been at that time with the agenda he wants to put forth. The agenda being, he believes, or he wants to believe clearly, in the immortality of the soul. And by the soul, we also mean the mind, right? But yet, this mind resides in the body, at least for human beings. Maybe for the gods it's different, but for human beings, our bodies seem to be necessary. But he can't say they're one substance, because if they're one substance, the obvious problem would be, then why does the body waste away and why does the spirit not? So then aren't they two substances, which seems more reasonable? And he falls under this trap. So he kind of suggests or implies that there are two substances. Fine. Problem. How do two different things communicate? How do two unlike things communicate with each other? And moreover, how are these two unlike things united? And moreover, even after that, of two unlike things, how is one dominant? Huge problems. Again, he's not very careful about this. So, if you're interested in this, you could read his interchange with Lady Lovelace, Linda, what's her name? What is her name? Eva Lovelace, I believe, but yeah, Lady Lovelace, right? And so she's an interesting lady. She was the daughter, if I recollect correctly, the daughter of Lord Byron, right? The great romantic poet. But many people attribute computer science. She's one of the founding figures of computer science, actually, way back then, right? She was one of the very few, elite educated minds, being a woman at that time. Well, she was a woman of privilege, obviously, but she was very, very sharp. And so she had these dialogues with Descartes about this dualism of Descartes, and she offered sharp critiques of Descartes' messy thinking. And in their dialogue, she had the better run of it, right? In their discourse about this particular problem. If you're interested in that, look that up as well. And that, of course, affects not only philosophy of their day, dualism, and theology and all of this sort of stuff, but huge inroads into into contemporary research into artificial intelligence, because the mind-body dualism is a very real and persistent issue in philosophy of mind. And in philosophy of mind, one of the practical case studies or problems in philosophy of mind is artificial intelligence. So if the mind is real and the body is less real or less important, then is the body just meat, as some people say, just organic meat? And it doesn't even have to be organic then, correct? If the body is less important than the mind. So then why can't a mind exist in a computer, a server somewhere, and not in physical meat? These are all questions that are very, very important in this day. But you could trace it back to at least Descartes' interchange with Lady Lovelace, right? And of course, you could trace it all the way back to Plato, Platonic idealism there. But there it's more, I want to use this word carefully, more mystical, more metaphysical. But for Descartes and Lovelace and others around that time, it's stripped away of a lot of that mysticism, kind of this form of the good and ideas and sort of stuff. But even practically speaking, even if we're becoming more and more scientific and more materialist in a sense, the fact of the matter is, for the materialist, the great problem is this thing called mind. Because where does the mind exist? Does it exist only in the physical organ of the brain? The argument continues, right? So, Cartesian dualism, as they say, is really talking about this problem, mind-body, that he does not resolve at all, really, but he offers kind of a frustrating account, but it's fruitful in a way, because it generates a lot of critique and dialogue back and forth afterwards. But to make a long story short, if you read the exchanges, the letters back and forth between, and the follow-up responses to criticism and these things of Descartes, he is actually not very adept at presenting his own view, because maybe his own view might even be confused. He probably didn't realize how complicated the issue actually is. So he offers kind of at the beginning, a messy but common sense approach to the problem. The mind and the body both exist for human beings. They both seem necessary, but the mind is clearly the dominant of the two. And the mind is the one that lives on after the body perishes. Common sense. It seems so. There's a great appeal of this, but he doesn't do much to offer a more consistent and more clear a model of human nature after that. So, be aware of that even great thinkers can have problems of thought later on. Yeah. I think that about covers at least the Russell reading, and we said a lot or most of the main points in the Descartes reading. In a way, I kind of wish I made you read more of Descartes, right? Because there's just so much good stuff afterwards. I would suggest anyone who's serious about philosophy, in your own time, read the entirety of the Meditations. Again, it's not that long, but you get to see, it's exciting actually, you get to see a founding document, if not the founding document of modern philosophical thought in Descartes. I would suggest that. But at least for this assignment, I think we covered most of the main points, right? At least for the questions in this assignment here. You should be able to know Descartes' problem. You should be able to put that in your own words and why he even begins the Meditations. Describe Descartes' major steps in his resolution. What does he mean by "I think, therefore I am"? How is he a foundationalist? And what are your thoughts on Descartes' nature of the human being? I am a thinking being, but then what problems does that lead to? What do you mean by a thinking being? Aren't we also a embodied being, as people often say, right? Don't we need the body? Or do we need the body if the mind is the more important of the two? If it's possible with future technologies, maybe not perfected now, but if it's possible to just kind of use bodies and replace our bodies like we replace, computer hardware. The software is the real thing, but the hardware is just replaceable and upgradable, right? And so if the mind is more like software, then our bodies are just hardware just to be replaced, right? Or is it? These are the questions that you need to kind of think about here. So hopefully that gives you a newfound respect for Mr. Descartes, perhaps. If you have questions upon this reading, then please email me, or I will see you online this Friday morning, and we'll have a nice little discussion. But I look forward to your reflections on Descartes, maybe even more than any of the assignments before, because this is when things get really exciting, in the sense that we're more familiar with this stuff by now, and it's more contemporary, it's more modern here, right? And, this is like in the 1600s, but still modern, relatively. And so we could relate these issues more so with our issues that we have right now. So I look forward to your work and your reflection, and have a good week. I know your week starts officially on Tuesday, but in a couple days maybe you'll watch this and start your reading. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.